Assalamu alaikum students, welcome to another lecture on the topic we started 2 weeks back. Yes, the topic was micro teaching. Good. So far we had almost 2 lectures on micro teaching. That was lecture number 16 and lecture 17. And today we are here for which lecture? Lecture number 18. So we are now near our goal, because see, we'll be meeting for 31 times, mean we have 31 lectures, and the final lecture, you know, that would be what, a concluding lecture. So now in fact we are talking more practical things, right? And micro teaching, of course, if you see the contents of this semester, you will realize that the micro teaching is the most important part of TEFL 2, right? And that's why we focus more on TEFL, and you see we have decided to give 4 hours to micro teaching, right? Even in some universities you might have heard, you might have seen that, you see, after the midterm the students come and they start teaching, right? So micro teaching is given more time in, of course, in the universities. Here our system is different. We are meeting virtually, in fact, so virtual ComSats. So we can speak more on the TEFL, and of course the handouts that you will have, the handbook that you will have will definitely help you, right, how to be an effective micro teacher, right? And it's very important area, because you are what? Student teacher, right? So it's a training, fine. Though you could say that the TEFL 1 and the TEFL 2, of course, it's a training for the students, I mean, who want to be professional language teachers, or they want to be trainers in communication skills, right? But this part, the part of the course, mean the 4th semester, we are more practical, right? And among those the topics, you see, micro teaching is even more practical, right? You could say, well, that while making lesson plan, you see, we try to be practical. We learned how to make a lesson plan. We learn which important parts to be included in our lesson plan. And then once you start teaching, of course, so this micro teaching encapsulates all the aspects of your teaching, right? Teaching of a foreign language. So as usual, we have to review the previous lecture. That was lecture number 17. So in that lecture we talked about what? This micro teaching cycle, right? And we saw that there are 6 steps of that cycle, right? And the first step was, if you remember, what was that? Yes, lesson plan was there, and then of course teach, right? Whatever you have planned for teaching, what do? You teach that, right? And then of course you teach, you are supervised, you are monitored, you are evaluated, and you get feedback, right? So in the light of that feedback, you teach again, and again you get the feedback. So again you teach. So this is what mean the process of teaching, evaluation and re-evaluation, and then you keep on improving your teaching. We also saw some characteristics of micro teaching, if you remember. While talking of characteristics, we talked about the strength of students in a class, right? We saw duration of a class, that a traditional class duration may be 40 to 45 minutes, whereas the micro teaching duration is not more than 10 minutes, right? The content also, right, in micro teaching, what the content is divided into smaller units. We discussed that, right? Only one teaching skill is considered at a time. Another characteristics of micro teaching, that you see, in micro teaching, at a time one skill is taught. I mean, you teach reading, you teach writing, or you teach speaking, fine. And of course you see that it puts the teacher under the microscope, right? You see, why the teacher goes under the microscope? Because he is evaluated, right? Once the micro teacher performs his activities, so a person evaluator, he monitors him. So that's why he goes under the microscope, right? All the faults of the teacher are observed. His good points, yes, his bad points are observed. So his good points are highlighted and they are told to the teacher that these are your strengths. For example, you are audible, it's a good thing. You speak well, it's a good thing. Your pronunciation is fine, right? Your class control is okay. But maybe you lack. You are unable to write legibly on the whiteboard, right? You are unable to use this marker on the board, right? So this is what you tell. You tell that a student, teacher, that these are your good points, these are your weak points. These are the points you need to work on. These are the points you need to retain, you need to maintain, right? So this is what evaluator can tell. And the traditional teaching, of course, you don't have this facility. You're not being monitored, right? So you never know your weaknesses, right? So in micro teaching, once you are under training, once you are a student teacher, so you are given feedback and you improve yourself, right? You improve yourself that how should I stand in front of the class? How should I talk? When should I talk? When should I ask questions? When should I let the students talk? Fine. So, I mean, what should I do when I teach writing skill? What should I do when I teach reading skills? Right? How should I react when somebody makes a mistake? Right? How should I correct a student? How should I correct an adult student? How should I correct a beginner? How should I correct a full-time student? So again, you have to think. You have to think and make plans. So again, you try to be psychologists at times. You see that, of course, psyche of the student. If you understand the psyche of the student, so it helps you in being a good language teacher. Right? And if you know the culture of the language you are teaching, again, it helps you. Right? So knowing the culture of the target language and teaching the language in that culture, obviously, really helps the learner. And of course, it's a learner's facilitation. You facilitate the learner. Right? And that facilitation, my dear students, helps you being teacher and also helps your learners. So we talked about these things, right? So again, in micro teaching, we discussed that discipline can be maintained. Very simple. That why it can be maintained and how it can be maintained. Why? Because we are dealing with a small number of students. We are teaching only 7 to 10 students, so it's quite natural that discipline can easily be maintained here. However, if you are teaching a traditional class, you are teaching 40 to 60 students, so chances are there that you have to be thanedar of times. Right? So to have a discipline, so maintaining discipline in that class is more difficult, a tough job as compared to a micro teaching, where you are dealing just with 7 to 10 students. Right? So this is what, my dear students, characteristics of what? Micro teaching. This is what we talked about in our last lecture. Let's start today's lecture, right? That is part 3rd of what? Micro teaching. Let's start part 3. Here, in fact, in the last lecture, we also started talking of what? Skills of micro teaching. And I'm sure you remember we talked about introduction skills. Right? And we saw that, yes, why we need introduction skills? Because we have to gain attention of the audience. Why we gain attention of the audience? So that we could help them out. So that learning would be facilitated. Right? To prepare their mind. Because naturally, of course, you have, it happens that you may not have good customers always. You have to bring them to the point that you are going to start today. So we talked about introduction skills. The next skill of micro teaching is probing questions. Right? Skill of probe. You know, probe problem. You probe into the matter. Look into the matter. So here is what? Skills of probing questions. Now what happens? Here probing questions are those which help the pupils to think in depth about the various aspects of the problem. This is what happens. By asking such questions again and again, the teacher makes the student more thoughtful, right? He enables the students to understand the subject deeply. Very simple thing it is there. Because once you ask question, right? And even it is an art to ask questions. Once the teacher asks questions, students learn how to ask questions. Right? And once they try to reply, first they learn how to reply. And then they think what to say. Because maybe when the teacher, phrases and rephrases his questions, he changes the pattern of a question, so that in fact makes learner think. Right? Their thinking can be diverse in that situation. Right? When you pose questions, when you ask questions, so these questions in fact help the learner think, and then he tries to give natural answers. And these answers reflect whether they have learned or they have not learned anything. So answering to these questions reflect understanding of the students. So that's why this, when the teacher asks questions, these probing questions, investigating questions, so the learner shows that how much he has gained, how much he has learned. So dear students, this is of course mean a skills of what? Probing questions, right? So what are the components of this skill? The first one is prompting. Now what is prompting? When a pupil expresses his what? Inability to answer some questions in the class, or his answer is incomplete, the teacher can ask such questions which prompt the pupils in solving the already asked questions. So he prompts in fact. Right? When one question is raised, then of course it is not being answered by the student. So again, the more questions are asked. At times the teacher rephrases his questions, and of course because we talked about this activity in the last class. We talked about this concept that when you speak, you assume things. So when you ask a question being a teacher, you assume that this could be the answer, and if your student is unable to understand, so you try to rephrase the question. Right? So this rephrasing of question, repatterning of question, resaying of question, obviously help your student learn how to question again, how to rephrase your question. Right? So this prompting, when you ask, if you are unable to get an answer to a question, my dear student, so what do? Then you try to rephrase your question, and then maybe your rephrasing of question would help the learner to answer you. And naturally it happens in the class. You must have seen, you must have observed that once a question is asked by the teacher, and if he fails to get the answer that he expected, so it doesn't mean that he expects that the student should get the answer as per his desires. So the teacher in fact comes, he tries to rephrase the question. The teacher thinks he might not have phrased the question, so he tries to make it simple. Right? So this is prompting in fact, saying the question again. So this is of course, example is given. Do you know names of Vice Chancellors of Quaid-e-Azam University since 1983? Do you know when did this ComSat virtual was initiated? Right? So the ComSat started virtual courses. Which year you got admission in the first semester? Do you know which year, right, you started this program? You know which year you will be completing this course? So prompting, right? You prompt your learners and they think of the answers. Another sub-skill in fact of probing question is seeking, of course, what? Further information. You seek more information, right? Remember, seek, sort, right? So you seek what? Further information, more information. When a student, in fact, answers correctly in the class, but the teacher wants more information, so then again the further clarification, the learner, by putting how and why. The teacher asks question, how it happens, how and why. Can you give an example? Right? So further information, because again if you are able to give further information, it shows that you have grabbed the concept. You know the things, and if you are unable to, maybe you have heard somewhere, right, and you do not know. Your concepts are not clear, or maybe you have learned that answer by heart, or maybe somebody, of course, gave you that answer and you don't know the logic behind that answer. So once you ask for more information, you seek further information. So how do you do that? You ask how and what. So that again means when you probe questions, you do that. Third thing is refocusing. You focus again, right? So when the teacher asks the same question from other pupil for comparison, this is known as refocusing. Again, another sub-skill of what? Probing question, refocus. Focus again. What happens? When the teacher asks the same question from other pupil for comparison. Right? Maybe two students give different answers. For example, what time is it? Right? So the one answer could be, it is 12 a.m. Right? Next answer could be, it is 12 noon. Another could be, it is 1300 hours. Another answer could be, it is 1 p.m. Clear? See? So, I mean, time could be from 12 hours or from 24 hours. I hope you understand. So this is what I mean when you refocus. The next thing is redirecting questions. Right? Questions which are directed to more than one learner to answer are called redirected questions. I hope you understand. These are what, my dear students, when you redirect the questions. They are sub-skills of what? Asking questions. First one, what you do? Seek further information. Next one, refocusing. And the next one, redirecting your questions, in fact. This is what, my dear students, what? Probing questions, skills for probing questions, right? So what do? You redirect. What do? You refocus. Right? What do? You seek more information. What do? You seek clarifications. Right? So this is a skill, we call it skills for probing questions. Right? And skills for probing questions obviously, in fact, help the learner think. Of course, their thinking can be diverse. The learner start thinking, in fact, you see 3G thinking. Is that clear? So the learner thinks from different angles, right? The next skill of micro teaching is skills of explanation, right? Again, you see that, my dear students, you being a micro teacher, you need to know how to explain things. Explanation is a must for a teacher. Of course, you are a student teacher, right? So being teacher, you have to have this skill to explain the concept that you are teaching. So how will you have it? Again, your reading, again your interaction, again your discussions would help you, right? You'll be able to explain things if you have done work on it. So it's a skill of micro teaching, right? So what do you call it? Skills of explanation. What is it? To present the subject matter in the simplified form before the pupil and making it acquirable is known as explanation skills. So that he would acquire. The one who explains, he shows that he has done a lot. He has read a lot. His concepts are clear. I mean, if your concepts are clear, only then you can explain things. If you are unclear about something, you won't be able to explain. I hope you understand. So that's why, my dear students, you see that in micro teaching, these skills are also evaluated. Your skills of explanation. You need to explain things, in fact. Skills of explanation, right? And how, for example, it involves the ability of the teacher to desirable logically how, why, and what of concept, events, etc. 5 W's and 1 H. Right? What is there? Why is it there? How is it there? What happened? Where happened? Is that clear? So maybe you go to etymology, origin. Why is it so? Right? So these are some, of course, these 5 W's and 1 H help you explain things well. Right? Your thinking also help you. Right? So your knowledge, your experience definitely help you explain things. So my dear students, what? Skill of explanation. Right? You see what you do? You present the subject matter in this simplified form before the student. Next point is, of course, now what are the sub skills of explanation? Skills: clear beginning statement. So my dear students, when you are, of course, in the process of learning how to explain things, so you need to give a clear what? Beginning statement. That what are you going to teach today? Which language item are you going to talk about? Right? So your statements should not be vague. Writing skill, okay, which sub skill of writing would be highlighted? Teaching grammar, which segment of that grammar will be highlighted? Right? So again, your objectives should be clear. If your objectives of teaching are clear, if your lesson plan is clear, so your beginning would be clear. So a crystal clear beginning statement is important. The next thing is lack of irrelevant statement. Fine? Another, of course, skill of explanation is that you see lack of irrelevant statement. When you give a statement, statement should be relevant. It should not be irrelevant, right? While presenting the subject matter, only the concerned statements should be used. Means statements which are relevant to the subject matter. And of course, I will go back to your lesson plan, that once you plan your lesson, you decide on, is it a relevant statement or is it an irrelevant statement? So over there you sift, over there you think, you plan and replan. So in this planning and replanning phase, you learn, my dear students, that which statement is relevant and which is irrelevant. बात समझ आ रही है? Are you understand? Do you understand? Yes. So these are what, my dear students, the third micro teaching skill, that is skill of explanation. Got my point? Another important sub skill of this is that is fluency in language. I hope you understand. You need to be fluent in language, right? Fluency is a must. It doesn't mean that accuracy is compromised, no. But if you compare these two sub skills of explanation skills, so fluency dominates. Clear? So you need to be fluent. And how can you be fluent in that language? Yes, by practice. Right? And initially you need to practice more. Practice speaking, in fact. The more the practice, the better you would be. So fluency requires your practice. And the practice makes you a better person, in fact. fluency in language, right? The teacher should use fluent language that the pupil may listen and understand the thoughts of the teacher. Well, students, so fluency is a must, right? Fluency in language. If you are a beginner, my dear students, so you need to practice, right? And of course, this micro teaching is a mock teaching as well. You see, so over there, yes, you try to use some expressions. Of course, initially you have to rely on some expressions of the language, how to begin a class, how to greet your class, how to welcome your class, fine, and how to give instructions, right? How to request students to refer to the board, and how to ask them to open your book, for example, if there is a book with them, and how to direct them. I mean, classroom teaching instructions, asking them to carry out the exercise, asking them to read and summarize. So these are some of the instructions that you need initially, right, once you are a beginner. Also, connecting links. The linkers, right? It is, of course, the technique is used primarily to explain the links in the statement with so, therefore, because, due to, as a result, however, on the other hand, consequently, fine, besides. So, I mean, despite the fact, in spite of the fact. So all these are the linkers that you use. Fine. Again, what? Skills for explanation. Clear? So again, fluency of language. And of course, linkers. If you have more points to say, you can use transitionary words. The first of all, we will talk about, example, defects in teaching. Then we will talk about how to improve teaching. So see, transitions. Then use of proper words. Again, it's an important point, right? The teacher should use proper words for explaining an object or an event. Otherwise, he would be in a state of confusion. So again, appropriacy. How can we have it? Again, dictionary is the best source. Again, reading is the best source. Again, meeting with experts of language teaching, right? So that would help you using proper words for the right situation, right? If you do it, yes, you would enjoy teaching. And of course, every good teacher keeps on improving. There is no end to improvement. Nobody can say that now he has done. So this process of learning, the process of improvement never ends. It goes on. I hope you understand. These are means, we call them the proper words. Precautions, of course, mean for skills of explaining. There are some precautions that you need to know. First thing, simple in language. When you explain, explanations should not be complex. Why not complex, my dear student? Because explanations are there to make things simple. And if you are using wordy language, complex language, jargons in your explanation, so it means you are not explaining, you are making things complex. So try to use language as per the requirements, as per the audience needs, as per the level of the audience. Simple language. Understandable language. Right? And then it should not be given the shape of an advice, right? Explanation is not an advice. It is just you are explaining things. You are making things clear. Talking about communication process, so you see there are 6 components of the communication process. So you explain each and every component. You talk about communicator, you talk about receiver, you talk about message, you talk about environment. So explanation. The thought included in it should be in a sequence. Again, sequence. When you talk about communication process, first you talk about communicator. Then, of course, receiver. Of course, the message. So a sequence is also important. Because sequential way helps improve teaching learning. So do things in a sequence. Irrelevant things should not be included. Try to be relevant. I've talked about this earlier. We have deliberated on this earlier, that you see, try to be relevant. Right? So again, how you decide on, if you are prepared, if you have a lesson plan in front of you. Right? If you yourself have made a lesson plan, if you know what is to teach in that lesson, and if you know how to teach, if you are clear about the teaching and you are clear about the procedure of teaching, so things would not be difficult for you. So this is what mean precautions are there. It should be according to the age, experience and mental level of the pupil. Right? I mean, of course, when you're teaching adults, so explanation we require there. Teaching to children, explanation we need there in fact. But teaching to beginners, you need more explanation, more examples. But if you feel that your learners are adult learners, and of course over there your explanation can be shorter. You take it for granted that yes, they are adult students, they know it. For example, teaching at the master's level and teaching at the intermediate level. You see, when you teach students having metric qualification, when you teach language, students having inter qualification, or if you teach students having bachelor qualification, yes, there would be difference. Teaching to foundation students, you have to go. You have to give them the basics because they are the foundation students. Or teaching at the certificate level, teaching at the diploma level, even teaching at the advanced diploma level. And again teaching at the master's level, of course. Right? So again you need to know their age, their in fact the course they are pursuing. They are professionals, they are doctors, they are engineers, they are teachers. Fine? They are primary teachers, of course, or they are what? Secondary teachers. So therefore, when you explain things, you keep these things in mind. So this is what my dear students, the skills of explanation. Is that clear? See? So for that we talked about skills of introduction. Right? And then we talk about skills of explanation. Another skill is, my dear students, skills of stimulus variation. Now what is stimulus variation? Variation, you know word? Variety. You know we like variety? Yes? We don't like monotony. What do you think? Do you like monotony or variety? I'm sure you like variety. You want change, and of course we all want change because change is life. Right? See, so every day we are getting old and there is a change, you see. Right? In our personality, we undergo changes. We change ourselves. And you know, changes are the challenges. So here means stimulus variation. Right? Is described as what? Deliberate change in the behavior of the teacher in order to sustain the attention of the learner throughout the lesson. I mean, if the teacher is monotonous, lockstep, he stays at one place and he never moves, so what happens? No change. And learner would get bored very soon. Right? So again, if there is a variation in the stimulus, if the teacher is innovative, if the teacher loves change, if the teacher brings changes in the class, and the teacher shows his dynamic personality, teacher is active in the class, he changes his voice, is that clear? He uses his body language in the class, he uses his paralanguage in the class, clear? And he, of course, moves in the class, not excessively, but he moves, and he interacts with his learners. So things become more fruitful. If he keeps learners in mind, if he goes with the learner, or he tries to elevate his learner, and a situation where he ignores his learners, Right? So a teacher must consider his learners. Is that clear? Because teaching is what? You are facilitating the learner. What you do? You are facilitating the learner. You need to facilitate, and you think of the best possible means to facilitate the learner. And for this, you think of the best possible activities so that learning would be effective. Learner would show his interest in the learning. If the learner shows no interest, it means there is something wrong on the teacher's part as well. Clear? Again, the harmony between the teacher, the students, and the subject matter. We talked about it in the last lecture as well. So creating a harmony between these three segments, right? The teacher, the one who teaches, and the audience, the students, and of course the subject matter. I hope you understand. Are you with me? Yes, students, this is what is important. So stimulus variation is very important skill of this micro teaching. You need not to be passive in the class. You need to be active in the class. Active teacher, in fact, teaches actively, and the students become active as well. Learning becomes active. So, in short, active teacher teaches actively. Learning becomes active. Very simple. So, your active personality makes learning active, and the vice versa. You're passive learners, so learning would be passive. Learner would be sleeping in the class. So the teacher must not let the students sleep in the class, because he is on the driving seat. Is that clear? If the driver sleeps, what do you expect from the passengers? Is that clear? So the teacher's stimulus variation counts a lot. Got my point? Then the body movement I talked about earlier, that we call it kinesics, body motion. Mean the postures of a teacher. How does the teacher stand in front of the class? Again, it's important. Right? If you stand properly, not like a soldier, but in a professional, relaxed way, you will feel that the students would give you due respect and you would teach language well. Your proper postures, proper standing in the class. And if you know how to stand in the class, yes, you look well in the class, you look smart in the class. And if you, stand, of course, right? If you stand non-professionally, if you don't know how to stand, if you move like a pendulum, so you may not win your students. So my dear students, body movement, kinesics, or the body language is important. Like we focus on the body language. Every day you watch cricket match, you see the body language of our players was not as per this match. So is the case that the teacher's body language, the teacher's body movement, teacher's body motion, yes, they play an important role. I hope you understand. See, so that's why, my dear students, the physical movement of the teacher in the class is to attract the attention of the learner. Once the teacher moves, naturally he gets attention. If he remains stagnant in one place, he doesn't move, he might not have the attention of the students. So teacher's movement in the class helps. And again, it is beneficial for the teacher as well. Because once he moves in the class, students give him response. Once the teacher moves in the class, he gains more confidence. And once he moves in the class, he can move to the next point well. So again, teacher movement, teacher postures, gestures, right? Thumbs up is a gesture, thumb down is a gesture. teacher emblems in the class, right? So these are, of course, mean the ways that the teacher teaches. These are the ways that stimulate variation, right? So this is important, right? Don't stand like what? Stone idle. You are an active person. Teacher should be active, right? So active personality, of course, mean improves learning process. Then, of course, the gestures of the teacher are important. Involves what? The movement of your head, nodding of your head. When you nod your head, in fact. Clear? Hand and facial expressions, facial gestures, laughing, right? Raising eyebrows, emotions, all are important. Teacher is, of course, right? So therefore, these are very important. Showing sadness, showing happiness. Clear? Using appropriate gestures, appropriate to the situation is important. Right, students? So therefore, another point is change of your voice, mean paralanguage. Very important. Now, what is paralanguage? Vocal quality of a teacher. Change in voice is important. Right? Monotony kills teaching. You need to have change in your voice. At times you go up, at times your voice comes down. When does it go up? When does it come down? It depends. Again, linkers, your voice can come down. Talking about, keywords, content words, voice goes up. Clear? The teacher should bring fluctuations in his voice. Intonation. Students feel boredom when the speech at the same pitch. There's no variety in the pitch. Monotony, we call it. Right? So don't be monotone, because monotony is a lullaby. What is a lullaby? Lori, we call it, right? Sleep, baby, sleep. Your father tends the sheep. What is it? It's a lullaby. The mothers sing lullaby for the kids and the babies sleep. So teachers should not do that. Clear? So what to do? Voice goes up, comes down. Important. So stimulus variation, important skill of micro teaching. The next one is focusing, another sub skill of this area. Focusing, right? Focusing implies drawing the attention of the learners towards a particular point which the learner wishes to emphasize, when the teacher wishes to emphasize. Such technique involves verbal focusing, gesture focusing, or verbal gesture focusing. The teacher uses his hand, right? Sample, of course. So again, when you focus, maybe you refer to transparency, refer to your whiteboard, or refer to your chart that you have brought in the class. So you focus, in fact, through gestures, through your voice, you focus, of course. Again, it's important. Sub-skill of what? Stimulus variation. Eye contact and eye movement. Yes, important. Clear? So, staring, eye contact. Maintaining eye contact with the audience is important. Some even teachers, initially what they do, eye contact, see, plays a very important role. In teaching, when you maintain eye contact, it helps you to express yourself well. It shows your confidence. So when you go for demonstration, my dear students, so try to maintain eye contact with the evaluator. Try to maintain eye contact with the students. Don't shy. Right? Try to maintain good eye contact with the students. Initially, you might have some problems where you in fact, you find it hard. Well, so what do? You find it difficult to maintain good eye contact with the audience. But if you try, you can overcome the problem. You see, when you maintain eye contact, my dear students, it helps you to express yourself well. If you fail to, you may not. seeing the student, in fact, because eye contact, of course, again you convey a lot through maintaining eye contact. Again, it's a way of teaching. Clear? Pausing, another stimulus variation. Being teacher, we take pause. Now, the point is why we take pause. When you take pause, you get a time to think. Right? So pauses are useful for you being teacher and for your learners. How they are useful for the teachers? Because once you take pause, you in fact have a time to think what to say. Like I take pause. And this pause helps me out what to say. Right? And this helps me to think of my next point. And that pause helps the learner to absorb whatever has been said. And once the learner decodes, that pause in fact gives time for decoding. And again, once he decodes, then he can encode. So pauses are important. Right? Refers to short and deliberate intervals of silence used while delivering ideas, explaining, lecturing, etc. So pauses are very useful. When you take pause, you gain energy. And that energy helps you deliver well. That energy helps you teaching well. And that energy that the listeners, they gain, they help them in retaining things. So pauses in teaching are a must. When you take pause, you get confidence. When you take pause, you get energy. When you take pause, you may breath. And those breaths may help you to say your point well. These are, my dear students, of course, we call them skills for stimulus variation. Right? The next skill is the fifth skill, skill of blackboard writing. Very important skill. But of course, nowadays, Blackboard is a very essential part of every language class. In every class, of course, this whiteboard or the blackboard is a must. Maybe after some time, you will have smart boards in your classes, but nowadays you will find whiteboards. Even in some areas, when there is whiteboard is not available, you would have this blackboard. So again, the skill of blackboard writing or skill of whiteboard writing. Being the visual aid are widely used in all aspects of education and training and are most suitable for giving holistic picture of the lesson. A good blackboard work brings clearness in perception and the concept being taught adds variety to the lesson. Again, we talked earlier that it's very easy to use Blackboard or the whiteboard. Fine, but we also saw some of its disadvantages. Now, what are the skills for blackboard writing or whiteboard writing? See, so what are, first of all, very simple, legibility. Right? When you write on the board, it should be easy to read. I mean, if you have a good handwriting, if you have a good hand, it's very good. If you don't have, even then you can make your writing legible. What you can do, that write, of course, with spaces. Do not write joining on the board because you never know about your students. Even, of course, some teachers say write in the capital letters. Of course, it can work. Some teachers say it wastes more time. Right? However, that it should be legible. Every student must read that, could easily read that. There won't be any confusion, particularly when you are dealing with pair of words. So, legibility is very important when you write on your board. Size and alignment again is important in straight line. Like I talked earlier, that you see when you write proper font size and plus alignment, straight line. Sometime you might have seen that when you write, your lines are not straight. Initially it happens writing on the whiteboard particularly, but with practice you can overcome this problem. If you want to improve this weakness, you can. Right? Straight line writing is important. Legible handwriting is important. Initially what you can do, whatever you have to write, you can bring it on paper. Initially. Later on you may do it, but of course once whatever you want to write, if you put that on the paper, writing on the board would be easier for you. If you do it there and then on the board, you might look for something. Highlighting main points. Right? If you are using Blackboard, multicolored chalks can be used. If you are using whiteboards, multicolored markers can be used. Headings can be given with red. Right? Subheadings may be with black, of course. So, green. Multicolored markers could be used for whiteboard. Multicolored chalks could be used for Blackboard. Right? But the purpose is highlighting. Once you highlight, yes, audience get attention, right? And an audience enjoy reading that. See, so attention of the audience is more once you highlight important points. And how you highlight, you have to see. Space on the board, it's very important. Some teachers, they in fact misuse the space on the board, right? These days in classes you might find two big whiteboards. But the space is important. And of course, while using that whiteboard, you need to know that where is your dice. Your dice must not cover the blackboard or the whiteboard. Put your dice aside. And try using, of course, starting from the center, and then you move on. Use both parts of the board equally. Sometimes you leave the space initially from the beginning, and at the end of course, your space ends and you have to come back. So before starting writing on the board, see where to start, think of, and then move on. Right? Of course, summary. Once you write everything, maybe you give a summary of that. Correctness. Right? If you're in doubt about it, sign of interrogation could be used. But better, of course, if you think of. Right? If you make a plan what to write on the board and you do it in advance so that in the class you might not be embarrassed. Fine? Teacher's position, I told you earlier, that where should you stand? You must not cover the teaching aids. You must not cover, in fact, the whiteboard or the blackboard. Stand at a place where, you see, you are not the barrier between the board and the students. Of course, contact with the pupils, right? The board is there, it's an aid, for example, right? You can discuss, and where to discuss? Once you are standing aside. You can use, of course, pointer can be used to focus on some points. So, writing skill, very important. Legibility, easy to read. What does it mean? A legible handwriting on the blackboard or the whiteboard draws attention of the learner, encourages them to improve upon their handwriting. Yes, this is very important. If you write well on the board, it's a message for the learners that must improve their handwriting. But if you have a poor handwriting, what the message goes on? Right? If you cannot improve at this stage, if you feel you cannot, you are helpless, then at least make it legible, make it readable, in fact. In order to make handwriting more legible, the teacher should see that a clear distinction is ensured between every letter. Adequate space is maintained between individual letters and words. Proper space between letters is important. Size and alignment is. Size of the letter written by the teacher on the board should be uniform and large enough to be read from the last row. Even people at the back could read it. And uniform font size. Sometimes some teacher, what they do, that the first line maybe font size is 20, next line maybe font size is 14. So that is not uniformity. Right? The size of the capital letters should be larger than that of small letters. And the handwriting should be as vertical as possible without being diverged from a line. So vertical writing is important. Highlighting the main points, of course. We are talking about skills for blackboard or whiteboard writing. The main points of words written on the board should only be highlighted by underlining them. You can underline them. That underlining means that this is an important point. Or, I told you earlier, you can use multicolored chalks. Multicolored markers could be used. Right? So, that is used for highlighting. Like in your computer now, when you type, you highlight things. Utilization of the space, again on the board, is important. For the proper utilization of the space, important words or statements should be written on the board. Overwriting on the letter should be avoided as it makes the blackboard work untidy. Only essential material should be retained on the blackboard and unnecessary words should be rubbed off. Only the information which you need to write, leave on the board. If you have done with the first activity, remove it and move on to the next activity. Clear? Blackboard skills are very important. Majority of the teachers I have seen that they are weak in this area, and this is not a difficult one. You can improve it. You can work on it. Right? So, in 1 point agenda. If you have to discuss one activity, do it first. Right? Then move on to the next one, rub it off, clean it off, and then move on to the other one. Sometimes it happens that you see, when you use a board, the previous teacher has done some points and you don't care for those points, and you write your own points. So that becomes a messy. Right? Your boards becomes cluttered, so it should be uncluttered. Of course, Blackboard summary. Make teaching meaningful to the learners. The teacher should develop Blackboard summary at the end of the lesson. That today in this lesson, we talked about this point. For example, you have used 4 times. You have done 4 activities on the board. You have cleaned all those things. This is one of the disadvantages. So at the end, you need to summarize all those parts. Means you need to rewrite all that has been cleaned. So we call it Blackboard summary or the whiteboard summary. Today in this lesson, we talk about these points. At the end, you give them. This helps those who are latecomers, for example. Then correctness. While constructing sentences on the board, teacher should be careful about correct spellings, punctuation and grammar. So students, you need to be correct. Spellings, punctuation, grammar. Right? Again, if you are a beginner, you need to do these things in advance so that you might not struggle once you have to write on the board. Position of the teacher is important. Right? So, your position should not be in between the learner and the blackboard. You must not be a barrier between the audience and the learner. You need to stand at a place where you are not disturbing the learners. I hope you understand. Your position is very important. Teacher's position is important. So you need to position yourself in an appropriate way. Contact with pupils. The teacher at the time of writing on the board should maintain eye contact with his learners. This is necessary for the controlling interaction, maintaining discipline, sustaining attention of the learner. Interaction with the learner is important. If you don't interact, you cannot maintain discipline. If you don't interact, you cannot take your audience on board. So interaction is a must for sustaining discipline and for effective teaching. So students, in this lecture, we talked about skills of micro teaching. So, skills of probing questions. That once, you see, you ask question, and questions are asked to check whether the student has got that concept or not. You prompt, you investigate. Is that clear? You help the learners answer. And once you ask question, yes, learners learn how to ask question. Because it is not that language learning is not that of course you just answer whatever is asked. You need to ask question. So, as far as skills of micro teaching are concerned, so the skills for probing question is important. You prompt, you ask questions, and you get reply. Skills of explanation is important, right? That of course every good teacher, yes, needs to be able to explain things. Explanation, right? If you are able to explain, it means you have got that concept, right? So when you go for the class, you need to have enough explanations, right? So over there, how would you explain your fluency of language? How would you explain your examples? It's important. The next one is skill stimulus variation. Now what is it? Right? There of course teacher should be a dynamic personality in the class. He should not be a passive person standing at one place and of course is a monotone and of course just singing lullabies for the students and not caring for the students, and the students come in and they go out and he doesn't care, right? He just goes on, maybe he writes on the board and of course he does, and bells ring and he goes. No. You need to be active in the class. You need to know who is coming in, who has just gone out. Even you are writing on the board, you need to see things. Again, you are a monitor also. You monitor activities in the class. You need to know what is going on at the back. Right? Again, the classroom management, of course. That who is sitting where. Right? Generally, you might have seen that, of course, the students have fixed boards in the class. You can change this, in fact. Because once you change position of the class, so the class intermingles. And that really helps in the learning process. Because if you have a fixed board, if you see sometimes the students are there, they are friends and they sit together in every class. So they may not share things with others. Others may not share things with them. So of course that's why the group activity, the pair work is there. And in language class we can change position of the students. Because once we change position of the students, they interact with other students as well. So obviously once they interact more, they learn more. Right? So stimulus variation, your body language, your postures, your gestures, your facial expressions, your eye contact, your vocal quality, your pitch, your volume, your rate of words, intonation, all that. Very important. Blackboard writing, very important part in fact. Right? Legible handwriting. Using the space, your position. Right? You need not to be a barrier between you and the learners, of course. So students, this is what, my dear students, you see, we talked about in this part of micro teaching, that is part 3, and we talk about various skills of micro teaching. It's a time to say goodbye. See you in the next class.